So I haven't made a video for a little while. I'm going to get back to doing the post office videos soon, but something else came up. Meantime, which was Trump. So I've watched a few of the commentaries about the US election, and I think there's something missing from the explanations of why Trump won. And that's what this video is about, the thing that I think they missed. The contrast between Trump and Harris couldn't have been clearer. Trump was angry, and Harris was joyful. And there are a number of simplistic explanations that have been offered to explain why people voted for the angry one rather than the joyful one. And they were, in one form or another, basically saying it was bad people voting for a bad man. But Trump voters aren't bad people. But let's lay out the bad person voted Trump explanation. It came in three simplistic forms. Trump is racist, so his supporters are racist. Trump does and says very racist things, and clearly some very racist people support him, people who push eugenic ideas, that black people are genetically inferior to white people. But I think those are very small groups in relation to Trump voters. I think many people voted for Trump because they looked beyond his racism, and I think the Democrats didn't give people much option but to look beyond it. And I'll tell you why after we get through the other bad people voted for Trump explanations. So explanation number 2, Trump is sexist, so his supporters are sexist. Trump does have a history of not just being sexist, but of appalling violence against women, including sexual assault and rape. It's now all pretty much publicly known. He was exuding toxic masculinity, promoting violence, and asserting his sexual entitlements and dominance over women, grabbing them by the you-know-what. But that doesn't mean those who voted for him were sexist or liked the idea of violence against women. And again, I think people looked beyond the way he treated women when they voted for him. And again, I think that's because they felt they had no option to. So explanation number 3, Trump is stupid, so those who voted for him are stupid. Trump did and said things that were stupid, criminally stupid. He's a convicted felon. But were Trump voters stupid to have voted for him? I don't think so. But I think that when they heard Trump getting called stupid, they felt themselves getting positioned in the social class structure. And this is a thing that I think has been mostly missing in the analysis, even in the more sophisticated analysis of why Trump won. So I'm going to go into a bit of a deep dive on social class, so please stick with me, because I think we need to do that to show how that positioning happened, why Trump became president again, I think provides us with a bit of a masterclass on social class. I'm going to make some big generalizations here because I'm after capturing broader underlying patterns behind people's behavior. It won't explain an individual's behavior, so bear that in mind. Also, I'll describe social class in a kind of static way. But we need to remember that social class is fluid. People can move between social classes as well as moving in and out of the class structure. So I came from a working class family. When I went to university, I entered a middle class profession. I became an academic. And I'm now kind of middle class. Well, kind of, because I'm not sure I really fit in with the middle class. Not convinced they want the likes of me there. Anyway, it's not about my history. I want to get onto a broader history about social class and where it came from. The history of the Western system of social class started in the UK and was imported into the US, with the Brits colonising America in the 17th century. For a long time, there were really only two classes: the lower class, who were the peasants working on the land, and the upper class, who were the owners of the land, the royals, the aristocrats, also bishops and knights, those kind of folk. There was no middle class to speak of. This was under the system of feudalism and the era of agrarian-based economy, farming. This existed from around the 9th century until 16th or 17th century, when it was replaced by capitalism and the era of industrialization. And industrialization resulted in the peasants moving from working on the land to working in factories, and they became relabeled the working class. The upper class, remained, but the landowners were joined by the owners of the factories, and the larger factories turned into corporations and made their owners very, very wealthy. And then we had a new class introduced around the 18th century, and they became pretty established by the early 19th century, which was the middle class. They were the folk who were taking up the new positions in the administrative structures created through industrialization, those who managed the factories and managed the factory workers. So that's kind of the history of social class. It's a really broad brushstroke of the class system, but the key thing we need to take away from it is that the lower class, or working class, and upper class have coexisted for a very, very long time, well over 1,000 years. So they've kind of had time to get to know each other. They've been in a long-term relationship. Doesn't mean they get along, but they've coexisted for a very, very long time. The middle class only came into the scene around 250 years ago or so, and they've had a bit of trouble fitting in. And that might be why the middle class have called for a classless society, suggesting that everyone should be middle class. They've found it really tough being in the middle. They get paid more, have a better life than the working class, and they bossed the working class around, so that's not gone down too well with the working class, who complain the middle class are up themselves and condescending. The upper class, well, they've got a complex relationship with the middle class. On the one hand, they're reliant on them to provide them with professional services they need to manage their businesses and wealth. So there's that kind of transactional quality to the relationship. You look after me and my wealth, and I will look after you. Trump is often described as a transactional person. Now, we'll get back to Trump in a minute. But with the upper class and middle class, there's also a bit of a sour relationship, because the upper class often find the middle class patronizing. The middle class think that they're somehow superior to the upper class in some way, even though they're not as rich or as powerful. And this kind of comes from how the middle class have taken up positions of authority in the education, legal, and political systems and elsewhere, and have mistaken that being in those positions mean they have some sort of moral authority and moral superiority over others. They can decide who's a bad and a good person. And they think they're in charge of things, when clearly they're not. A head of a major corporation is typically way more powerful than a politician, even if politicians don't like to think that's the case. That sense of moral authority and moral superiority the middle class feels is also expressed over the working class. They see the working class as uncouth, unsophisticated, and a bit vulgar. They see the upper class as arrogant, out of touch, and self-absorbed. And they see both the working class and upper class as stupid and lazy. The working class is seen as poorly educated, and the upper class is seen as well-educated, but lacking basic common sense, having an overinflated sense of their own competence. And they see both the working and upper class as work-shy. The working class avoid work by living off state welfare, and the upper class avoid work by living off their wealth. And they've got a particular gripe with the upper class, who they see as preoccupied with narcissistic pursuits. The upper class pay others to pamper them. They constantly worry about their legacies and ensuring their family name is in good standing. And they're constantly promoting themselves through paying others to manage their public image. They're narcissists. The middle class, well, they think that they're the only ones who value hard work. But the twist is that they also derive little satisfaction from their work. Their work is pretty empty of meaning, outside of being the thing that maintains their middle-class lifestyle. It makes them comfortable, but doesn't make them content. And that's largely why we now have a trillion-dollar well-being industry there to cater for their angst. The worried well. And it's the worried well that psychology now largely functions to serve, positive psychology being the latest manifestation of that. to focus on helping people who are materially secure but feel emotionally fragile. That's why mainstream psychology really only focuses on changing how people feel rather than changing the social conditions under which people live, because the social conditions that their clients live under, the middle classes, are perfectly fine and don't need changing. Now again, I am applying some really broad brushstrokes here, but maybe you can start to see where this is going. But before we go there, let's just crunch some numbers. How many folk are we talking about in each social class? Well, one way of working this out is to send out a survey to the public which contains a question that just asks people which social class they feel they belong to. And here's what we find from those sorts of survey questions. Working class, it's about 48% of people in the UK, 40% in Australia and 46% in the US. Middle class, it's 36% in the UK, 52% in Australia, 52% in the US. And for the upper class, it's 1% in the UK, 2% in Australia, and 2% in the US. Now, those numbers vary a little according to the survey that is being used, and some people either don't answer that survey question or don't know how to answer it, which is why those numbers don't add up to 100. But what those surveys tell us is that as well as the upper class being very small, which does raise worries about how so much wealth is owned by so few people, it tells us that a lot of people still identify as working class. Now, we need to bring in a bit of nuance here before we move on and talk about Trump. One big bit of nuance is how in the US, the working class is sometimes called the middle class, and the middle class is sometimes called the professional class, which is all very confusing for us in the UK and in Australia. But more generally, things can seem confusing because there have been broad shifts in what social class means. So the working class were defined by the type of work they did. They were the poorly paid peasants working the land, and then they became the poorly paid workers in the factories. But later phases of industrialization brought in new technologies that created new types of poorly paying work, and then being working class became less about the type of work you did, i.e. whether you were a factory worker or not, but more about how much you earned, or rather how little you earned. And we also see a shift with the upper class, so it's now not about nobility and land ownership so much, though it still forms a part of it, but it's more ownership of corporations and more about just owning extreme wealth. More about wealth than bloodlines, with the nobility and the royals. It's less about your family, more about your bank account. But even so, the dynamics between the working class and the upper class has kind of remained somewhat the same over 1,000 years. What has changed is that they now have a common grievance, the middle class, whom they both find to be irritating because the middle class are condescending and patronising towards them. The other thing to point out is that there used to be quite a clear set of distinct political alliances with the classes. The upper class tended to vote for the right-wing parties because right-wing parties typically looked after the super wealthy. The middle class has tended to be more right-wing because they're focused on accumulating wealth, but also some middle-class people are left-wing voters, particularly those in education, because they think they're morally superior. But the working class tended to be on the side of the left-wing parties. And that's because the left have historically sought to look after the workers. People like Bernie Sanders have attributed a key reason why the Democrats lost the election in the US was because they had deserted the working class, so the working class deserted them. Social class seemed to be a key reason, or a key part of the reason, behind Trump's election. But I think it affected things in a more subtle way. But before we get to that, we need to talk about young people, because a lot of young people voted for Trump and they gave us a clue as to how social class was affecting things in a way I don't know if Bernie Sanders has spotted, because it linked Trump to class in a really interesting way. So young people, here we're talking about Gen Z, people born somewhere between the mid-1990s and early 2010s. But we also might include the millennials here, because they are still kind of young. There's one trait, or rather a stereotype, that's commonly associated with both generations, which is the trait of narcissism. And yes, I referred to narcissism earlier, so you might now start to see the link. Narcissism describes someone who's self-obsessed, who cares more about themselves than other people, and who has an unreasonably high sense of their own competence. They're also seen as quite fragile, easily upset when people criticize them. Remember the Trump criticism from Obama. I won't repeat it. But we'll get to Obama in a moment, Barack Obama, because he said some interesting things. Anyway, let's get back to young people. Both Gen Z and millennials get criticized for having this trait of narcissism. That's not to say they have it, but they're thought to have it. It's a crude stereotype, but it's treated as though it's real. But even if the stereotype were true, we should bear in mind that Gen Z and millennials would just be behaving exactly as they were told to behave, because by the 1990s, mainstream culture had been, for at least 2 decades, seeking to reshape the national psyche to conform to the logic of neoliberalism. That was when people were being told that they should be putting themselves first, looking out for their own interests, and to see the self as a kind of entrepreneurial project, meaning they had to continually engage in a project of self-improvement and self-promotion, to be the best version of yourself, and all that nonsense. And we've still got that today. And during the 1990s, this project of the self became a kind of moral project. It was seen as a bad thing to be prevented from pursuing your own self-interest. And the concept of social injustice shifted to include personal grievance. And that neoliberal ideology lifted to its extreme during the 1990s, and it's still pretty extreme today. So Gen Z and millennials grew up with this stuff. Actually, Gen Z and millennials are showing signs of being less selfish than the rest of us, and is having a more collective spirit than previous generations, probably because of the existential crisis we're all facing from climate change. But for some reason, we're still calling them narcissistic. I don't get that, but we'd need a separate video to start unpacking all of that. What's interesting is that the self-same criticism of narcissism is made by the middle class of the upper class, that they fail to work hard because they're just pursuing their own self-projects of self-promotion. And it was a criticism levelled quite a lot at Trump, that he was a narcissist.
This is one of Donald Trump's biggest roadblocks to success in this race. As long as he continues to allow the malignant narcissism that seems to lead him in all of his decisions, to lead him in this campaign, then this is, that's just such a bonus. That is such a bonus for Kamala Harris.
There's no denying he's narcissistic, and he has a massive ego. And so that's why he continues to even talk about things that are as silly as crowd size in comparison to his opponents. And so,
and that criticism that Trump was focused on and driven by his personal grievances was seen by the Democrats as one of their best lines of attack on Trump, particularly the one delivered by Barack Obama.
Since he rode down his golden escalator 9 years ago, it has been a constant stream of gripes and grievances that's actually been getting worse now that he's afraid of losing to Kamala.
The problem is that this criticism of narcissism, intended to shame Trump, echoed across to young people who heard that same shaming tactic used against them. And for me, that's the last piece of the jigsaw that might help explain why Trump won the election and how social class was a key factor in it. And the two things that bring that to the surface was a piffy little slogan the Democrats like to keep using, which was hard work is good work, and the decision to focus on joy and to reject anger.
And this is going to be hard work, but I know we like hard work. Hard work is good work for all of us. Hard work is good work. And we will do it with joy.
Well, for the middle class, hard work is good work because they get paid well for all their hard work, and it helps them build their wealth. For the working class, hard work's not good work. Hard work's just hard work. Work is hard when you're getting paid a pittance, and no matter how many hours you put in, you still can't pay your bills. Work's hard when your boss gets paid 10 times what you get paid, even though they work less and do less than you. Work is hard when you get threatened with the sack if you complain about your pay and conditions. Work's hard when you know you could be laid off at any minute and it doesn't matter how good a job you do. You'll just be sacrificed if the company thinks cutting you will make them more money. Hard work's not good work. It's hard work because of the appalling social conditions you have to work under. And hard work isn't an option if you're working class, it's just what you have to do to survive. We call it hardship. It's a grind. It grinds you down physically. Hard work isn't the thing that's making your life better. It's making your life shorter. And your life is getting worse no matter how hard you work to make things better. That hard work is good work slogan is what middle-class people say to themselves when they want to convince themselves that their work is good. And the only measure they have of that is how much they earn. They assume hard work is rewarding because they get well rewarded for their work. But it's not hard to work when your working conditions are good, when you have good pay, good security around your employment, and a nice little pension waiting for you at the end of it. The hard work is good work slogan, I think, could have been really alienating to working class folk because those on the poverty line, well, that would have sounded really condescending. It's that condescending tone that echoed through the class structure that they've heard so many times from the middle class, constantly berating the working class for not working hard enough. And it's the same thing they berate the upper class for. And it's what they berated Trump for, mocking him for playing golf when he should have been at work. I think that slogan just amplified the condescension of the middle classes, how they were condescending to the working classes and patronising to the upper classes. And if that wasn't enough of a slap in the face for the working class, they doubled down on the condescension and sold them joy. Middle-class folk are desperate for a bit of joy. They enjoy a reasonably comfortable lifestyle, but their work has so little value other than sustaining that lifestyle that they need to find happiness elsewhere. You know, they're the intermediaries. They're not the workers, so they don't make anything other than money, and they're not the owners, so they don't control anything. They're mostly the pen pushers. They're the people who have those midlife crises when it dawns on them that their career has no point. So they're doing okay, they're doing well, but they're feeling unfulfilled, and they need to find a bit of joy from somewhere. And as I said, psychology is a profession that now predominantly services that need for the middle class to feel better about themselves, catering to the worried well. And psychology is cashing in on that multi-billion-dollar well-being industry where the middle class pay through the nose to get their chakras realigned. Now, I've got a video on why psychology doesn't serve the poor here. I'll put the link in the description box if you want to have a look at that. The Harris campaign, well, I think they decided to pamper to the middle class and give them the joy that they were wanting. And of course they would, because the Democratic Party is run by the middle class. Joy was their rallying call. For the working class, they don't have material security. They're not well off. They don't enjoy a comfortable lifestyle. They're not looking for joy. They're not having a midlife crisis. Their whole life is a crisis. They're looking for social change, something to change the social conditions that are causing them misery. Telling someone who's experienced horrid social circumstances that they need to look on the bright side of things, telling them to be more hopeful and to be more joyful and think positively about their situations, what's called toxic positivity. And I think that is what the working class were getting from the Harris campaign. Unlike the middle class, working class aren't sitting around thinking, well, I'm doing okay, but am I happy? They're thinking that things have never been okay, and I'm angry. And I think Bernie Sanders was right about that the working class are angry. But I think there's this story that people are telling, which is that people are angry now that the Democrats lost and Trump won, and they're angry at the Democrats. I think they were angry all along, and the Democrats weren't listening to them. They're angry at the middle classes bossing them around and making life miserable for them. And I think they're angry that they're being told to cheer up. The working class wanted someone to acknowledge their anger and get angry alongside them and shake things up. And all Harris appeared to want to do was to cheer them up, asking them to put all that bad stuff behind them and move on. And that's how I think people heard her call to turn the page.
It is time to turn the page on the drama and the conflict.
And she seemed to characterize the anger and tension felt by the working class as a kind of family tiff at the dinner table.
Trying to keep the American people divided and afraid of each other. That is who he is. But America, I am here tonight to say that is not who we are. That is not who we are. That is not who we are. You see, what Donald Trump has never understood is that e pluribus unum, out of many, one, isn't just a phrase on a dollar bill. It is a living truth about the heart of our nation. Our democracy doesn't require us to agree on everything. In fact, we like good arguments from time to time. Just think of your own family, right? It's not the American way to not have disagreements. We don't shy away from robust debate. In fact, we like a good debate, don't we? We like a good debate. And the fact that someone disagrees with us does not make them the enemy within. That's right. They are family, neighbors, classmates, co-workers. They are fellow Americans. And as Americans, we rise and fall together.
But those tensions are way more than that, when the person you're in disagreement with has all the power and you have none. You don't have a friendly debate with someone you disagree with when they have authority, enough authority to crush you when you tell them they're wrong. When you don't see eye to eye with your boss, you're out of a job. It's not a disagreement, it's a conflict with severe repercussions when you're on the wrong side of that conflict. And when she did acknowledge that working class folk had been wronged, she offered them restorative justice to address that wrong through saying, we're all going to heal and forgive. When you're angry, you want retributive justice. Make sure the wrongdoer is made to pay for what they've done to you. She criticised Trump for his agenda of vengeance, the image of him sitting there stewing away, drawing up a list of all the folks that have wronged him, that he was going to take his revenge on. And she mocked him for that. In doing that, she was telling people that retributive justice as bad, as crass, as uncouth. But the thing is, retributive justice was what the working class wanted. They needed those who had harmed them to pay for what they'd done, and when they heard Harris shaming Trump for wanting revenge, they heard her shaming them for wanting that too. And perhaps they saw their chance in the election to take a bit of retributive justice and take a revenge on her for that and vote her out of office, or as Trump would put it, to tell her, "You're fired." The Democrats, they failed to capture the visceral pain of the working class who had been living for so long on the poverty line. If someone was saying to you, just turn the page on all of that, you're going to say, no, let's not do that. Let's look at the goddamn page, because it's got a list of all the harm that's been done to me and a list of all the people who've done it, and you need to make those folk who did that harm accountable. Harris wasn't offering them that. It was also there in that other slogan, "We're not going back."
So I think you've heard tonight two very different visions for our country. One that is focused on the future, and the other that is focused on the past, and an attempt to take us backward. But we're not going back. These extremists want to take us back, but we are not going back. 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 But America, we are not going back. We are not going back. We are not going back. Not going back. We're not going back. We are not going back.
It was supposed to reassure people that we aren't going back to the bad old days of discrimination and prejudice, but the thing is, we haven't much moved on from that, and saying we're not going back when we're still there translates to we're going to turn our back on all of that. And you could hear people wanting something else. Do you remember the "lock her up" chants by Trump supporters during the Trump presidential campaign against Hillary Clinton, 2016?
I will say this, Hillary Clinton has to go to jail, okay? She has to go to jail.
For what she's done, they should lock her up. She's disgraceful.
It's just awfully good that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country.
Yeah, because you'd be in jail.
That "lock her up" chant was all about Clinton's record as Secretary of State when she had that issue of using her private email server for her professional duties. Well, Trump supporters continued that rant of "lock them up" in this presidential campaign, this time directed towards Biden. But Harris supporters started chanting it too, this time against Trump. It happened when Hillary Clinton spoke at the Democrat National Congress. You heard the crowd shout out, "Lock him up," after Clinton recounted how Trump was a convicted felon and Harris was a successful prosecutor who had locked up villains like Trump before. Of course, delegates would shout out, "Lock him up." But no, they weren't being offered that. Clinton treated it, I think, as a funny joke.
As a prosecutor, Kamala locked up murderers and drug traffickers. She will never rest in defense of our freedom and safety. Donald Trump fell asleep at his own trial, and when he woke up, he made his own kind of history, the first person to run for president with 34 felony convictions. As Vice President, Kamala sat in the Situation Room.
But the Democrats didn't respond much beyond that, and they didn't pick up that their supporters were angry And that's why they were seeking retributive justice. It wasn't irony, it wasn't satire, it wasn't a joke. It was something much more serious. I don't know if she understood that at that moment delegates were voicing anger. When delegates did start to voice their anger later in the conference, this time when Obama was talking about Trump, they were told to hush up, because you should be better than that. It was when delegates booed Trump's name and were quickly admonished, do not boo, vote.
He doesn't. Do not boo. Vote.
Hey, I want to boo. I can do both. I can boo and vote. The slogan should have been, do boo, do vote. But that's not so catchy, which is why I'm not a political speechwriter. But what they got was condescension. They got that finger wagging. I think the working classes felt the finger was getting wagged at them. The don't boo vote was a catchphrase Obama used in the 2012 campaign.
But Republicans in Congress led... No. Don't boo, vote.
It's because I think it had that condescending tone of a middle-class person telling a working-class person not to be so crass. They needed to be better than that. That healing is better than hating. So you had, on one hand, Trump, with his kind of Nazi approach offering Heil, and you had Harris, with her let's be nice approach, offering heal. What are you going to do? I'm okay with the hate, thank you. I'll go with the hate rather than the healing. I think they also got it wrong when they criticised Trump for feeding the public with an agenda of fear and division. Trump wasn't feeding that to his supporters, he was feeding off that from his supporters. People were angry, and he voiced the public's anger, and the Harris campaign admonished the public for their anger.
Donald Trump has spent a decade trying to keep the American people divided and afraid of each other. That is who he is. But America, I am here tonight to say that is not who we are. That is not who we are. That is not who we are.
When Harris told people that is not who we are, she was saying, you angry working class folk, well, you're not like us. Stop being so crass. Be more civilized. Be more like us. Be more professional. And that had that echo of the middle class telling the working class that they were not good enough. And I think the working class heard that echo through them every time the Democrats attacked Trump. Those criticisms of Trump, that he was lazy, a lazy, rotten scoundrel. They heard that same condescending tone that so often had been turned on them. In fact, all that name-calling of Trump was using the insults that had been used against them, the working class folk. And that's why I think people looked beyond those criticisms of Trump, his racism, his sexism, because those criticisms literally bounced off Trump and hit them. And that's why the working class, I think, just, swept it away. Just swept those criticisms away. And when the Democrats and their surrogates called Trump a narcissist, well, those criticisms bounced off Trump and hit young folk square in the face. And I think those young folk just, swept it away for the same reason. And that's why I think those criticisms of Trump didn't land. And Trump was annoying the middle class, particularly politicians, bureaucrats, and the left-wing political commentators. He was ruffling their feathers. He was shaking them up. I think the working class liked that. The middle class, in turn, was calling Trump names, and I don't think the working class liked that, because it was the same names the middle class had been calling them. And that's why I think the Democrats, well, I think that's why the more they criticised Trump, the more the working class started to lean towards Trump. I think the Democrats realised that towards the end, but by then it was too late. By then they'd helped make Trump look like the great disruptor, and the Democrats just looked as though they were disrupted. And the working classes wanted someone to be a disruptor, to speak of anger, not of joy, because they wanted to see the establishment getting shaken up. They wanted social change. The system was causing them harm, and they wanted it disrupted. Social change is fueled by anger, not joy. Joy is the thing that gets you out of your armchair into your backyard to smell the flowers and maybe do some pruning on your hibiscus. Anger is the thing that gets you out of the house onto the streets to join a protest. It's anger, specifically moral anger, that causes the disruption to the social order that's needed to enact change at a time when social change is needed. Moral anger is what you feel when someone other than yourself is being mistreated, and that's the stuff that kickstarts social action. Anger's not the same as being violent. Protests can be joyful, but they're motivated by anger. Anger is the emotion that helps people respond to noxious things happening to people's lives because it energizes people to take action. Protests motivated by joy are not protests, they're celebrations. And anger is not the same as violence. Most violence is not anger-driven. It's driven by the assertion of power and dominance over others. And most violence comes from planning, not from anger. Democrats wanted to open up a space for celebration. Why do you think they had so many celebrities on their stage? Trump, well, he gave people a place to protest. He gave them a space to be angry. The way he did it was dangerous and reckless because he did link people's anger to violence. But anger doesn't have to lead to violence. The Democrats, I think they could have linked people's anger to peaceful activism, but they didn't. They just asked them to stop being angry, turn your back on all of that stuff that's happened in the past, just work hard and be joyful. Okay, let's sum up. I've ranted for a little while. I'll sum up. I'm so sorry. First off, let's go conclusion. So first off, I'm not trying to provide a simple explanation or a singular explanation. There would be many things impacting people's voting behaviours. Anyone who tells you it was down to one thing is an idiot. No, I am an idiot, but I'm not telling you that it's all down to one thing. I definitely don't think I've identified the one thing that explains why so many people voted for Trump. Also, there are plenty of counter examples of the things I've said. I know lots of lovely middle-class people who are doing meaningful work. There were Democrats speaking at conventions who were speaking of their anger and speaking of the anger of the working classes. There was people talking of retributive justice in the Democrat campaign. And Trump crapped all over the working classes by using that tactic of pitting one group of people with no power against another group of people with no power. And in case you haven't worked it out, the result of those types of things is no one wins, because the prize is who becomes the biggest loser. Anyway, there's all of this stuff going on that are counter examples, but I'm not trying to capture all of the things that happened, but I'm trying to bring out those broader patterns. So I'm going to miss out that sort of fine-grained detail that you'd get if you didn't do that kind of broad brushstroke stuff. So I'll be missing all of the intricacies that were involved in the reasons why people vote and the way the Democrats went about trying to get people to vote for them. But what I am trying to do is pick out that broad thing, which is social class, and see if we've missed something in relation to this, particularly that link between the working class and the upper class. I think that might have been one of the things that hasn't been fully considered right now, and maybe we do need to think about it. So what I'm saying is that people heard Trump getting beaten up for the things they got beaten up for. It didn't turn people against Trump, it just made Trump more familiar to them. It tapped into that deep down familiarity between those at the top and those at the bottom. The working class might dislike the mega rich, but they're very familiar with their existence. They know where they stand with them. The working class don't know where they stand with the middle class. They don't trust them. And for young people, you had laid on top of that the berating of Trump for being a narcissist, only looking out for himself. Well, Gen Z and millennials, that's precisely what they get criticised for. And I think that's cemented in that sense for young people and working class folk that Democrats were attacking them when they were attacking Trump. And Democrats were telling people don't be angry even though people had good reason to be angry. And they ended up promoting polite conversation way more than they promoted progressive taxation. They told us we needed to be nice more than we needed to be equal. People just wanted someone to feel their hurt and to feel their fear, to recognize their grievance, their lack of power, and to do something about it. And the sad thing is that Trump is the only one who appeared to recognize that. And Trump's not going to push progressive taxation to equal out those economic inequalities that are causing people to be so angry. So the working classes, they rejected the toxic positivity offered by Harris and reluctantly accepted the toxic masculinity offered by Trump. And now the world has to deal with Trump all over again. Okay, it's not there. It's been very long. Thanks for watching this. If you found this of value, do hit the like and subscribe. But also I'd love to hear what you think and tell me if you agree or disagree or have a different take on all of this. But just to warn you, I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm way, way, way behind replying to comments. I try to reply to every single comment I get, but I've just had way more than I've ever imagined I'd ever get. And the comments are way nicer than I think I deserve. So it's taking me a bit of time to get my head around that, but also to get the time to reply to the comments, because I got numbering in over 1,000 now, and I do want to get to it. And the other thing to say, if you're new to these videos, is I don't make money from these videos, so I'm not delighted that so many people are commenting and engaging with the videos, because it's bringing the cash in. I don't make money out of the videos. I don't monetize the videos. I do it because I'm an academic, and academics are supposed to contribute something to society. You think we get paid out of the public purse, we've got to give something back. So I don't do it for the money, but do it because I think I should contribute to the public discourse on what I think are important issues. So if I'm not doing it for the money, maybe I'm not as middle class as I thought I was. Anyway, you've got stuff to get on with probably, so I'll leave it there. Thanks for watching. See you next time. And I will get back to the post office videos. Okay, so till then, ta-da.